We wanted to host a frank and open discussion on the state of Black and Indigenous mental health and wellness, and talk about the impact of isolation on seniors living alone. Um, what are some of the gaps? Some of those kinds of ideas. How is COVID impacting the mental health of seniors? We've invited these community leaders, most accomplished and dynamic women I know, to share and to introduce. I want to introduce the panelists. So I got a selection of bios. Some are like 4 lines and others are like 2 pages. So with respect, I'm just going to take out the little pieces I can. So let me see, where are they? Hold on, I got them here. So I would first like to introduce Lana. Lana MacLean is a critical practicing social worker with over 25 years experience working in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities in the area of mental health, wellness, and trauma-informed care. Lana has a small clinical practice, and Lana is a very humble person. She has not really emphasized her other accomplishments. I won't, because I haven't got permission to do it, but she contributes so much to her community. Um, and I feel honored to have you with us, Lana.
Thank you.
Mary Desmond, born in Glace Bay, now living in Upper Big Tracadie, a mother of 3 and a proud grandmother of 4, presently the municipal councillor for District 2 Municipality of Guysborough, a retired nurse, there again, healthcare, published author of 2 children books, Good Morning, Mr. Charlie, and Aisha, It's Not a Dump. She sits on many boards. I can't list them all, or else we might be here for more than 2 hours. But she is the chair of the Guysborough Health Board and the co-chair of the Guysborough Housing and the president of the Seniors Council. Oh my God, Mary, when do you have time to shower? And I also would like to introduce Sharon Davis-Murdoch, who is the co-president and treasurer of the Health Association of African Canadians. And that organization is doing incredible work in the community. It's really making a big, big difference. And thank you, Sharon, for your leadership. She is also the former Social Inclusion and Diversity Health Policy Advisor to the Department of Health. And Sharon has lobbied for years for health services designed specifically to meet the needs of Black women, and a leading voice behind the project that HAC has undertaken with the province, a grant that's going towards the Sisterhood Initiative. And if I've missed anything important, panelists, you please add it to when we get to our conversations. Okay, and let me see. I think the last person is Debbie. Debbie is another superwoman and so busy because they're doing a 3-day event on the waterfront for the Reconciliation Day. So she's really, really busy. So she said, Shell, I'm in and out, in and out. But I'll say a few highlights about her. She's a retired chief petty officer. Debbie Isaac is a Anishinaabe from Batchewana First Nation and was born in Sault Ste. Marie. She spent 36 years in the military. She was highlighted by her involvement in the closeout operation of the United Nations base in Rwanda. She is now working as a community events planner at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center, and she organizes and plans a myriad of events. And I know that to be true. She's just everywhere doing everything. Debbie is a member of the Indigenous Council of Elders at Dalhousie University, St. Mary's, and the chair of the Halifax Police Diversity Working Group, and so on and so on. Like I said, also such accomplished women. So at this time, what's my next move? I think I would like just to hear from you all before I pose any questions to you. So Lana, would you like to be first?
Yeah, that would be really helpful. First of all, let me say thank you to this organization for the invitation this morning. I truly appreciate it. As I said earlier when I came on the call, I cannot stay for the whole 2 hours, but we'll really be looking forward to whatever questions arise that I can give some reference to. And most important, I just want to say I stand on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and on the legacy of a history of African Nova Scotians who've been here for over 400 plus years. As most folks know, my full-time job is at Dartmouth General Hospital in the emergency department and in the ICU. So I come with a particular lens from that of a hospital social worker, as well as someone who's connected in community. And I want to just highlight 4 particular points that I would like us to give some consideration to, and then we can build on some conversation afterwards. And these are just my notices. As we look at the last 18, almost 19 months of COVID and its impact on the mental health and mental wellness of our aging communities, particularly our BIPOC communities, it's fair and reasonable to suggest that the impacts on our aging community are very nuanced, specifically to each particular community in and amongst itself. BIPOC communities are communal. BIPOC communities are relational, and we have a rich understanding of the importance of honoring both our children and honoring our elders. So the mental health impacts, again, for those particular communities, our BIPOC communities, but specifically for the African Nova Scotian community, which is what I like to speak to, are the following points that I like to raise. One is that the issues and the impacts of isolation, when we go into our bubbles, when we go into how families are structured. As I stated earlier, most BIPOC families are community and intergenerational in housing. So when you have intergenerations living together, the bubble concept of keeping people safe requires everyone to have a mindset of like a willingness to look at whether or not they're going to get vaccinated. As we know, our seniors, particularly our BIPOC seniors, are the most vulnerable around the prevalence of getting COVID because of their multiple comorbidities. And if we're looking at targeting our BIPOC or Black families, our seniors, we also must have a strategy, which this province actually did through the Health Association with Sharon and the Association of the Association of Black Social Workers, of doing a different methodology and pivoting to meet those particular cultural needs. So the issue of vaccine to meet the particular diverse needs of the Black community in an intergenerational household is one of those mental health pieces that is very nuanced within those particular communities. So if Nanny gets a vaccine and someone else in the household who doesn't get a vaccine, or it's intergenerational and someone who's under the age of 12 lives in that home, we have some mental health concerns around people feeling like, am I safe even in my own home, even though people are trying to navigate the nuances and walk with due diligence in terms of ensuring everyone's collective safety. And we have to go back to our cultural worldviews and our cultural values around taking, it's not just about me, it's not an I-centered approach, it's a community or familiar centered approach. So we can support people intergenerationally in their homes and in their communities to leverage what they can do to support people around vaccine adherence and compliance. So when we have more people in our communities vaccinated, then we have less mental distress. And if we have culturally relevant ways of engaging people, we can also reduce the amount of stress within those particular communities of care. So the impact of anxiety and having a culturally responsive approach for our seniors and their families mitigates some of those anxiety-related feelings. So that's one thing I like to present. The other is that we are a community over the past maybe 10 years, at least from my perspective, that we're seeing some of our seniors, because our work-life balance and our capacity in communities is getting a little thinner, that we're actually having some of our seniors placed in long-term care facilities. And the impact of COVID, of having not being able to see our families, who are particularly our seniors who've gone into long-term care facilities, has had a significant impact and worry, not just on the family, but also on the senior who's used to having family come in on Sundays or whatever day of the week it is. And the restrictions that were put in place limited the access to our seniors and increased the social isolation. And we saw a lot of that when we, particularly when we looked at what was happening and the amount of anxiety in the African Nova Scotian community around the prevalence of COVID, and particularly one nursing home in the Halifax jurisdiction, like the Northwood situation. So the isolation some of our seniors were experiencing, who have frail brains around their dementia features, coupled with not having that direct family contact, you know, visiting your parent or grandparent by Zoom is such a foreign concept, but it gave maybe the family member a little relief to see their loved one, but it didn't really work for the senior or the person who is aged with dementia features or other healthcare related matters that required them to be in nursing home. So the tools, although were helpful to those of us who can use them, to a lot of our frail elderly in nursing home facilities or in care facilities, it gave them an opportunity, but for them to even orientate to see where the camera was. But it was good to hear voice. And I want to say thank you to the nursing home facilities who leveraged what supports they could to make those community connections. So so it helped not necessarily mitigate issues of isolation, but it gave a pathway for our community to connect with loved ones and seniors who are in care facilities. The third point I'd like to share is that just globally around mental health issues, pre or post COVID, is the lack of family preparedness to deal with mental health issues as they arise in their loved ones who are aging. I hate to say it, but a lot of Black families are avoidant. We see the progressive decline of our seniors, but because of our cultural worldview, we don't necessarily want to, consider them to, say, well, Nan or Grandpa or so-and-so is losing their keys, or these are things that we're noticing. And sometimes it's about not necessarily us having information about how to navigate that, or having the language around progressive illnesses in our senior population. But if we know, so family preparedness about how do I enter and have these hard conversations needs to happen pre-illness, not post-illness. So one of the ways that we can mitigate some of the mental health impacts on our seniors, and part of this is our cultural worldview, is to start having conversations as adult children of seniors, or as, talking to our parents about being prepared for their aging process. Now, what we do know, at least from a medical perspective, is that we do know that Black people, particularly people have a prevalence again around comorbidities, the higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of cardiac illnesses, means a higher prevalence for something called vascular dementia, where our blood, Aunt Mary can speak more to that, and so can Sharon. But with vascular dementia, those comorbidities really can significantly impact us at an earlier age, in terms of making us get dementious features early as a mental health issue versus later in life. So those risk factors that place us at more vulnerability require us as families and as communities to have more what I call family preparedness, to have those intervention conversations, so we're not so distressed, and that we've actually put things in place to make mental health shifts and challenges that our loved ones will face less intrusive, and we are actually more inclusive in the process, and have a better situational awareness of how to best support our loved ones. That's point number one. Number two. Number three, I believe, is that we have to look at the psychological impacts of mental health illnesses such as dementia. And it is a progressive illness, which, for a lot of us, including our loved ones who are seniors, that we're watching actively someone lose themselves, or be, pivoting towards watching someone gradually, for at least in my perspective, as someone who watched my mother die from from her primary dementia illness, to be grieving with them as they are grieving the loss of some of their capacities. And that's a very nuanced relationship, a nuanced piece in families that impact all of our mental health and mental wellness as we look at the mental health and wellness of our aging community. So there's loss of community connections. And then sometimes there's these wonderful memories, because, the illness of dementia is not necessarily things that are in the present tense, but it's long term. And you get all the old family histories, and the all family news and business kind of puddles out. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that some of the significant or prevalent mental health issues that a lot of our seniors have experienced become amplified when they have dementia. So issues of anxiety, depression, things that we used to say their nerves are bad, now gets elevated and amplified with another complex mental health issue layered on top of that. And during COVID, we have to figure out, how do we then get support for someone who may be what we call concurrently disordered, both with a progressive illness like a dementia, that's a mental health issue, as well with an underlying anxiety that we've always kind of sheltered some of our loved ones, particularly aging, from. The most prevalent thing that I think we can all discuss and be mindful of is that even within the African Nova Scotian community, the issue of stigma and mental health is still present. And we don't necessarily want to call things what it is, but when we have language and we know what it is, we actually get a better tool to address those things. I knew, like I said, someone saying, well, that's just who they are. Or that's just, they're just being forgetful. If we can catch some of those things a little earlier in someone who's aging in their lives, we actually can extend their quality of life instead of watching the progression. And the other is that, in terms of stigma, we want to keep our loved ones at home. And that might actually not necessarily be in their best interest, because their healthcare issues as they age can become much more complex and dynamic. And we need to have those hard conversations around, how do we support someone as they age in our community? And what is that impact on their mental wellness? Because all of a sudden, Black folk who are not used to going into the system, are maybe the only Black or 2 or 3 Black folk in a nursing home facility. And then it's the education of that nursing home facility to ensure that they are culturally competent in serving diverse communities, which is something I believe that, a lot of nursing homes need to take into consideration as we look at the increase in our aging population and diversity in our province. And the other is that, we need to give some consideration around intergenerational traumas, but also how COVID can actually be a re-traumatizing experience for some of our seniors and for some of our families. So those are the things that I want to kind of just put on the plate today as we have more richer conversation. But those are the 5 kind of elements that I'm mindful of as I see how COVID and how intersects with mental health and wellness of our aging community and their frail elderly population. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lana. Wow. I learned so much in that conversation, and you're so right. I mean, I'm thinking myself, we were so unprepared when my mother got dementia. We didn't know what to do, how to do it, Oh, Thank you.
I just say the more we're cognitively, cognitively prepared, the more we make the journey with our loved ones more culturally responsive, and not that we're being reactive, because it's hard enough hearing that these are the particular things that are presenting, and hearing some diagnoses of illness, but also how the family, and we all know all families have different kind of clusters in them. I know mine does,
Mhm.
and how people want to walk the walk. Some folks really want to support the person at home, but they don't necessarily have the capacities or the skills. We may have the willingness
Right.
to do it, but we also have to have the capacities and the skills to support. And let's be honest, the continuing care system does not have a lot of breadth and depth in it to support our loved ones the way we would like them to be supported. And because we're relational people, it even becomes more difficult when people are coming in and out of our homes. So we're just going to shut that down during COVID to mitigate risk. But then we're getting caregiver fatigue and caregiver burnout during those periods of time as well, which places some of our loved ones at risk around increase in physical health issues that bring them into our emergency department with, prevalence of bed sores, a prevalence of caregiver fatigue, and then urgently putting people in places that necessarily don't reflect who they are. But thank you, Shelley, for that.
Oh, thank you. Who would like to speak next? I can't choose. I don't know.
Uh, Well, I'll go because a lot of what I have to say actually dovetails really well with what Lana has said, and I'm not going to use a lot of time because I know that we want to have conversation that's interactive. But I guess I would jump in with these points. As Lana referenced, and I think you may have as well, Shelley, I am in my role as co-president of the Health Association of African Canadians, and I'm a founding member. So our organization is now 21 years old, which ages me. There you go. I own every one of my years. So I would say really that in that role, I also have, as a result of pandemic, become the co-manager of the Association of Black Social Workers and the Health Association of African Canadians COVID-19 response and impact team. And we were out ahead or we were actually in lockstep with the beginning of the pandemic that was known. So we did town halls right from the beginning, talking about culturally specific information for our people, because there was a lot of misinformation out there on social media, and we felt the responsibility to, as we always do, to provide information that was factual and that was culturally specific. I do want to say that COVID laid bare what we knew anecdotally, and that was that there is a lack of cultural competence, of clinical cultural competence, of culturally specific healthcare and services. And indeed, it laid bare more than any other time in history, the lack of health data with race, ethnicity, and language identifiers. Because we did not have that very important information to be able to have the evidence that we knew anecdotally, but that the system says it requires to say how we were disproportionately affected. And that has been our fight. It is our fight. We continue that. Hopefully we won't have to fight so much. Now we'll be able to implement is what I anticipate and am so happy about. But indeed, we had all of those things working against us, right? While we tried to meet the challenges of comorbidities, which means, of course, more than one chronic disease, and our people have that. And so fighting dementia while having the comorbidities of diabetes and high blood pressure, which are, again, anecdotally, because we don't have the specific data, but we live high rates of those in our community.
Mhm.
And so that against the realities of multi-generational family living, as Lana has pointed out, poverty, right? Poverty, essential worker employment. Our people were on the front lines. They were and all people on the front lines of serving in a system where they were more vulnerable to being infected, and the underrepresentation of our people at all levels of the health system. So this exacerbated mental health, or I'm sorry, mental illness, mental health issues, mental illness, and dementia symptoms. And as Lana has pointed out, US literature tells us, and research tells us that we have elevated risks of Alzheimer's disease in populations of Black people. And the comorbidities of diabetes and hypertension exacerbate that because it affects the oxygen flow to the brain, makes us more vulnerable. Another important risk factor is APOE4, which is a genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease that disproportionately affects Black people, across the world. But that also dealing with the impact of microaggressions and systemic racism, all of that together is, puts us in a place where we are vulnerable to poor health, COVID or not, and COVID exacerbates that. So from the HAWK point of view, very quickly, our work has always been about system change. It has been about informing improved services, policy that deals or that includes us. And as they say in the disability community, and I often say, that came from civil rights, nothing about us without us. So if you're making policy that is a one size fits all, you are not meeting our needs. So the Health Association of African Canadians our work is on highlighting how we, as people of African descent, participate in decision-making in the health system to turn it around so that we indeed do participate. We become decision makers. Our work is about how we are responded to, given the disproportionate impact of ill health on our people. How does the system respond to us? Does it do an adequate job? How is it improving? How are we cared for in institutions that the system incorporates, i.e. continuing care? How are we cared for? In what ways are culturally competent health delivery processes in the system, in continuing care? How are we cared for? And how ultimately can we change for the better to improve our health outcomes? That is the work of HAWK. That is our concern, and it is highlighted by, or at least exacerbated by the impact of COVID. But moving forward, we want to use the lessons learned and the things that have been highlighted change.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon, for really explaining that whole purpose and objective and how important all of those factors are in changing the system. Sometimes it's hard to articulate all that, or to, so you painted the picture that really all of us could see. Thank you so much. Now it's 10:20. I'm thinking about you, Lana. Um, I know you have a limited time. So I'm wondering if I should ask if anybody has any questions for Lana before I move to Mary, because I don't want you to have to leave and people have questions for you. Mary, would it be okay for me to ask that question?
Sure, no problem. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So I guess I'm going to go there. I'm going to ask any participants if you have any questions for Lana at this moment in time. So this is your opportunity.
And again, my apologies, everyone. I didn't know how busy the hospital would be today, and my pager is just beep, beep, beeping. So I just told folks I'll be up in 45 minutes.
Okay. So if you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand. Whatever you want to do. Is there any out there for Lana?
Again, I'm not that brilliant, but the women that are following me, like Sharon, Auntie Mary, and I forget the next person up, Shelley, who's our Aboriginal sister. I'm sure they can handle those questions as well.
Okay.
So Lana, I have a comment. So I'll put my hand down because I've opened up my mic. I've unmuted myself. So just thank you so much for that perspective. Because I think you have identified some of the challenges and some of the gap, especially when we're dealing with the intergenerational families. So I just wondering, how do you see the go forward?
Oh, I think the gift of COVID is that it requires us to actually have meaningful conversations, and to actually sort of and have meaningful conversations and hard conversations around meeting the unique and nuanced needs of our diverse communities, particularly within the African Nova Scotian communities. It also speaks to shifts in policy and in politics. Sharon identified issues of poverty. Those are intergenerational issues, and we're not going to solve them overnight, but we do know the federal government gave seniors an additional $500 to support their health and wellness and getting food. I think the moving forward piece as well is that it reminds us to pivot back to some of our cultural worldviews, where we are about the collective and not the individual, that it's in everyone's best interest, not just my own in best interest. It's about if I care and love and support someone, then I do, even though it may feel uncomfortable, I'll get educated about what needs to be done to make sure I walk a path that is respectful of the new generation as I support the old generation. I think it requires us moving forward to actually to move past the avoidance and actually step into and lean into the challenges without thinking about this won't affect me. I think we have to shift some of our own cognitive dissonance as a Black community about what we think we need, and not just always revert back to the old ways. We have to give some consideration that the social reality of the Black community, even though we are a group of communities that really focuses on the wellness of and supporting our aging and elder community, that those weaves and those threads are getting really thin. Not all of us live in community any longer. Not everyone has access to that support. The days of people checking in on neighbors has become more problematic, particularly during COVID. So I think what it's required of us, Miss Josephine, moving forward is to take what was rich from the past, stir it into a new pot of soup to see about what new ingredients we need to do. It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, it's just changing the temperature. It's about figuring out how we can align what worked for us in the past and to move it forward in present day. But it also requires us to actually become more politically engaged as a Black community and advocating for our needs and naming those needs. You know, particularly if, you know, you can't be and see about things if you didn't vote. You know, so it's like, for me, it's a strategy about getting out the vote. It's, for me, it's a strategy about being politically engaged to say, these are the issues that are of importance to the African Nova Scotian community, and we're going to speak up for them in a different frame, and with the hope that government can hear and respond in culturally responsive ways. So I think the way forward is multifaceted. I don't think it's one path, but I think there's a path for us as accountability to our community, a path for us to be accountable on a social political pathway, and a path for us actually to take accountability for what we need and have hard conversations in the intimate pieces in our family about, you know what, grandma really can't stay home any longer, and we can't depend on Miss Shelley because she's still working. You know, we're working longer. We're not just, you know, somebody's not just a stay-at-home person anymore. The days of what used to work, the capacity for our churches to support people, the capacity for women who used to take on that responsibility and that additional labor is not always there. So the context of our reality as people of African descent has shifted, and we have to acknowledge that shift and not guilt women into doing more when they have so much already on their plate to balance. Their grandmothers, their daughters, their aunties to other children. We're doing multifaceted things, and there's a different level of burden of what I call caregiver fatigue and all of that work that usually gets elevated over to women as well. So I think it's women starting to say, here are the boundaries of what I can and cannot do to support my loved ones and in my family and my community. Doesn't mean we're not doing the work, but it means that we have to share the laboring of the work, and to connect with community-based organizations that we can say, hey, this really belongs to you, which is something that HAWK and ABSW, something that the Brotherhood Initiative is doing, things that are actually doing, or hey, you know what, to the government, this is what we need, and you need to resource this appropriately. So that social political action piece, which I think is so, so important. Oh, and there are two men present today. Hey, hi, how you doing? And as men, you're absolutely right, Ed, that there is a burden to be shared, and a collective responsibility, Ms. Josephine, I think is where we're going back, that worked, but also the social political action behind it. Thank you for your, I hope that answers, I'm not sure.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I thought was important just to stimulate that conversation before you left.
Absolutely. My apologies, everyone. I got 2 more minutes. I can take one more question, and I have to like go back to making the bread and butter.
I have something if nobody else does. I well, thank you so much for everything that you shared. And I think there's a couple of points that really jumped out at me as the lack of family preparedness, and it's like the fear or unwillingness to have the difficult conversations and to support somebody through that grieving process when it comes to dementia and dementia-related diseases. And I'm wondering if you have any insights, words of encouragement, any ideas about how to support families and loved ones who are going through that process. And in particular, like, how do you do it in a way that's not, it's like, I don't know, celebrating the person and supporting their independence as long as possible, with the recognition that that it is progressive disease, that that's a challenging thing to go through.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for the question. It really is a particular dance and a particular walk, and it's very intimate. So what you may be able to bring into that person's life and your relationship will be slightly different than what your other sibling or another cousin or someone else will bring. So I think it's an individual journey and an individual path, but it is about you being cognitively and family preparedness, to me, is one of the things that mitigates family conflict. So let me give you an example. When my mom turned 60, she didn't need anything else. like another sweater, another pair of like pants, I don't know. So my husband and I said, listen, my mother's not prepared for like, and my mother has an underlying anxiety disorder when she was living. My mother didn't want to talk about death, dying, and all those things. But I said to her, you know, for your Merry Christmas, actually, was it Merry Christmas? It was Merry Christmas. Here's a gift card to a lawyer. And it's going to be for your advance directive, a power of attorney, and it's in your will. The things that you need to tidy up some business so you can direct while you are well, your care while you are aging. So it's about giving them agency and giving people agency while they are still cognitively intact. And the worst thing people want to do is see a gift card or give something, see your money that their child has earned really hard go to waste. So it was walking with her to go to make the appointment, not, you know, sitting outside as she sat with the lawyers and people to do that work. And in our community, within the African Nova Scotian community, we have a rich body of Black lawyers who people can trust, right? Lots of stuff can happen virtually, but most of these lawyers, you know, once, you know, can certainly email something, or they can actually sit with someone in their office, in their boardrooms, physically distancing. So I think there's things that we can do for our family. I don't think most of our seniors need another dress for church with a hat and shoes to match and a purse to go. I don't think they need that anymore.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I do. Oh, they do. They can recycle an outfit, Shelley. But I guess what they have, but it gives us an opportunity in a small, meaningful way to say, look, you know what, let me invest $200 in this instead of $200 in that. And it opens up the conversation for the whole family to have. And most of it is not about estate planning, because most of our seniors have nothing except, and those who have land, it really is a good opportunity to come alongside and get those pieces of their lives organized. Now, in terms of watching someone progressively decline with their dementia, it is a grieving process, Jocelyn, and everyone on the phone who's experienced that. But in that nuances, I think it's about watching or actually witnessing someone's historical memory as a place and a reverence point of us being humble. My grandmother always told me, God rest her soul, that you're once a woman and twice a child. And I didn't get it when I was 17, 18, or 19. I got it when I was 22, watching her move from a bedroom upstairs to the living room downstairs with a commode on the side, watching what it means for me to be in my full humanity with her. There's the gift. It's about the gift of humanity. It's a gift of memory. It's a gift of walking a journey while you're watching someone who may remember who you are and may not, but it's in the joy of being humble. And at least for me, it was a lesson in humility and a lesson in memory. And I think those are the places that we have to find the joy, and those are the things you call on. But I think family preparedness is one aspect, and take it upon yourself to say, I think we need a little conversation. And most of our seniors don't necessarily want to have that conversation. They always say, when I die, God, God gives me one more day. And I always say, use that as a moment to say, what if God says tomorrow's your day? You got your stuff together? Well, don't put that on me. It's like, no, I'm not going to put it on you. Don't be talking that into me. I said, no, you're talking it out loud. So we have to have that conversation. I think there's wonderful ways that we can network with our seniors while they are still cognitively intact and well. The prevalence for people, as you know, and it's even more difficult for Black men to have those conversations than it is Black women. So there's also that gender nuanced. But again, Jocelyn, I think it's the journey really is the journey of the individual that you have and your relationship with them. And I always say, family preparedness really is about having those conversations 60 and on, not at 72 when there's already some questionable things happening, and then people get all tied up in a ball about, you did this to mom, you said this to mom. I'd rather just keep things clean. I hope that answers your question, Jocelyn, in some ways.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you,
yeah.
Lana.
Thank you, everyone, for your willingness to stay on the call while I was jabbering, but also your willingness to show up today to have these conversations so we can figure out a way forward. And to have a richness that we can all just be able to say, never gave consideration to that. So to have this conversation to allow a willingness to have a different level of consideration means that we're moving in a direction that supports our seniors as we move forward. Thank you, everyone. And again, my apologies. I do have to leave.
Thank you.
Blessings. Take care.
Thanks, Lana. All right. Now I would like to introduce Mary. I think I already read your extensive bio, but I would love the opportunity to hear from Mary Desmond. Mary lives in Guysborough and is going to bring broad rural. Thank you.
I'm not going to talk from a clinical perspective. I'm actually going to talk from a rural perspective, an African Nova Scotia small community. I work with seniors groups, actually the president of Seniors Council, and that's 7 seniors groups we work with. One of the groups is an African Nova Scotia seniors group, and the others is groups outside of the African Nova Scotia community. And I've been a president of the council for about 4 years now, but our African Nova Scotia group has been together for 12 years. Working with seniors, I really enjoy working with seniors, and we always try to work with our youth. We always make sure that we mentor our youth when doing projects and try to take care of our youth, because we figure that without our youth, our community, I was telling Shelley that we have in Upper Big Tragedy, we don't have any youth. Our youth are outside of our community in Antigonish and Sunnyvale. And so our community is not going to last very much longer. So Shelley start crying, but I always think that, you know, there's a positive thing that's going to happen to Upper Big Tragedy. But anyway, to talk about our seniors, mental health factors for mental health is race and systemic racism, employment, poor housing, social isolation, poverty, and the lack of transportation. And that all affects Upper Big Tragedy. Every one of those factors affects Upper Big Tragedy and affects our seniors in Upper Big Tragedy. So I go back to the African Nova Scotia because we have a historical baggage with the transatlantic slavery. And our Black women have always been labeled with strong Black women. That label is, you know, and if we look back in our history, women have always took the leadership role in the family. If we go back when during slavery, you know, how women have been raped and abused, we always had to hold back our emotions to save the family. That was the big thing, because if they let that emotion go out, of course, the male counterpart would have to rise up and could, you know, be killed or whatever, and that would break the family up. So we always had to keep that emotion within ourselves. And that stigma and that label always went right across the Atlantic waters with us. And we kept that even today. And so if we showed any weakness, that today is with us today. So we got that label with us even today. Even most women today, a lot of our young women today are single parents. And to show any, to look for any any kind of sign of weakness or to look for assistance or any kind of help is a sign of weakness. But we all know that to look for assistance is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. So anyway, today in society, there's especially in the rural area, we don't have transportation. There's no public transportation down in our area at all. So, and there's a big shortage of housing. So we cannot reach out for any kind of assistance. So there's this mental health, all these combinations of factors that are affecting our mental health. And today we have that stigma from the past, the baggage that we have from our historical baggage, and we all have these combination of factors that are affecting our mental health. So with the pandemic that came, that combination with our historical factors and the pandemic multi-factors, what has happened. So we cannot reach out and say we need help. We look at our society today and we say to ourselves, can we look in our healthcare system today, and especially in the rural areas, we don't see people in our healthcare system that looks like us. There are very few, especially in the rural areas. You might see it in the urban areas where you see people of color working in healthcare, but down in the rural areas, there's very few. You might see one or two. So we don't see ourselves, so we cannot go and ask for help. So we look for maybe a community leader to navigate us through the system. Our system down here is very broken. We don't have that mental health navigators. We don't have even medical navigators down here to help us. They're down here, but they're not culturally competent to help us. And so we depend on our elders. That's who we depend on. They're the only people that we can depend on. And our elders are not medically competent. So it's very hard for when Lana says, be prepared. We are not prepared. But you know what? We down here in the rural area, we never had any problems with COVID because we stayed in, we were isolated, but we took that family togetherness and we used that, the historical part of it, we used that to keep us together and to keep us safe. We did use the fan out system that even the hospital used. We were more prepared and ready for to see how each other looked after each other, because we knew that there was a shortage of housing. If someone in the community was to get sick, we had nowhere to go. We only had like one bathroom in our houses because there was no available housing. So we knew if something happened in our small community, there would have been a real crisis. And the municipality was not prepared. They were not prepared for anything that would happen, because I had asked, I said, if something happened in the Black community, was the municipality prepared? And they weren't. They were not prepared. So the municipality was looking for us to look after ourselves, which was, was terrible. But we did look after ourselves because there was a shortage. Technology, of course, in the rural area is terrible, it still is, because the rural areas never looked after as the urban areas looked after. We're always looking after ourselves, and we're always looking at innovative ways to look after ourselves. The seniors group got small funding, which they did activity bags and took them out to the different seniors. They also did meals and delivered meals to the seniors. They did and sent letters to each other so that they could communicate for those who didn't have internet or hardware to communicate technically. But you know, it was during the pandemic, like there was mental health issues that no one seemed to care, really did care. Like, you know, we talked about preparedness, but society down here did not care. And I know that Halifax was prepared and looked after, but the rural area really, to me, like it was just like we're in another little world all to ourselves, the rural area. And like I'm not going to blame Halifax or any other place, but it seems like, you know, the rural area is always left to look after themselves. And we seem to do all right. We, you know, like I said, we're resilient. We looked after our own, and we managed to do what we could. And like Lena said, you have to prepare and look after, you know, prepared readiness. And I think we did all right. Was there mental health issues? There was some. And I think all in all that we did okay. There was things that we had to do and we did it. Like, you know, we did our meals, we got out, we did some visiting on our own and things like that. But for society, like, I don't know, we're on an island by ourselves and that was it. But the issues like intergenerational living, we have that down here. We have it plentiful down here because of the housing issue and the housing shortage. And housing is a problem all over Nova Scotia, not just Nova Scotia, it's in Canada, really. We have drug problems down here, the same as anywhere else. We have poverty, we have a high level of unemployment because there's no economic base in Guysborough County. There's systemic racism, just like anywhere else. So we do have our problems down here, and we do have mental health issues, and most of the people down here will not go and look for help for mental health. I'll tell you that right now. It's a stigma. There's the stigma of mental health. They will come to an elder and they'll ask for help with the elder, and the elder is the one that will give them the assistance that they need, but they will not go to professional help. And it's because of the historical background. They don't see people of their own color in mental health down here. And I know that, you know, I think that some people have come down and tried to have meetings. The social workers have come down and they had small groups and they have, you know, kitchen table talks and that, but they won't indulge. They just don't. They'll talk to elders. Like, you know, we had a couple of suicides down here. And I'll give an example. There was a young chap came to the church, asked for prayers, then went out and commit suicide. Like, you know, it's just, they will not communicate with outsiders. What I see is that we need to get someone inside the community who will who will become a social worker or who will become a therapist or whatever to give professional help, but they're not going to look to an outsider for that help unless they're an elder. Like, you know, so to me, like, you're either going to have to train an elder for mental health or bring in a professional from the inside, train them for, because we had 3 or 4 suicides in this community within, you know, the last 5 or 6 years. We had suicide, but You're not going to, these people up down here are, and it's not seniors, it's young people. Like the seniors are strong hearted, like, you know, they're engaged. And I think they're engaged because of the communications that they have within their clubs. And that is the only thing that keeps them going, is this, the club, the socialization. And I don't know what would happen if they never had the socialization within the clubs, because that is the only thing that's viable down here. If you come down here and ask, what's the biggest thing going down in Guysborough, they'll tell you it's the seniors club. It's not the church anymore. The church used to be the center of everything, but it's not the church anymore. It's the seniors club. So I you know, I don't know what to say. Like, you know, the seniors are active, and their mental health is at jeopardy because of the pandemic. But I got to say that they are staying active, and as long as you can keep the seniors club going, I think that they're pretty well balanced, like, you know, Shelley, and but there is a lot of factors that are, you know, could tip the scale down here. And it's those factors, like, you know, like I said, it's the systemic racism, the employment, the housing. There's a lot of these poverty. There's a lot of things down here that is that can tip that balance quite easily, like, you know. And it's not going to take you know, it's not going to take a sitting down having a conversation. It's going to take political. It's, you know, sitting down with the municipality, the provincial government, and the federal government to do something. Like I said, this community is going to be gone in a few years' time, like, you know. So, like, you know, it's like I always say, I'd like to have a little monument put up in this community to say that, you know, there was a Black community here. But, thank you for letting me speak. I don't know if I hate to leave on a bad note, like, you know, to say that, you know, this community is not going to be here in a few years, but I always think positive, like, you know, that something's going to happen big in Upper Big Tragedy, but I doubt it. I don't see anything. As long as I'm here, we'll keep the seniors going, and we'll think positive. But I think that I'll look after their mental health, and I'll look after them until I'm gone anyway. So I thank you for letting me come here and speak today.
Thank you, Mary. Their story is so important to hear. We don't often hear the story from the rural perspective and experience. And yeah, I am a bit of a crybaby. I did start crying when you explained how the community was dying, and it just hit my heart, and it still does. It still, you know, impacts me to think that a Black community that was standing since 1783 is just going to be gone, and there's not going to be anything left.
Well,
So,
tragedy
here I go again.
Tragedy was where all the Black communities originated from. The Loyalists came in from Halifax and Birchtown and down the South Shore and everything. There's where all the Black communities originated from, was from Shabaka Bay and from Guysborough, you know. So
you know, you give me hope. You give me hope that something will happen, and I just am so appreciative for all the work that you do and your group does. Yeah, thank you. So I did have, I wanted to hear from Debbie, but I don't know if Debbie's with us. Debbie is the events coordinator at the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center, and she's working on this big project for the 3-day event, so she may not be able to be with us today, but that gives us lots of time. I had a whole slew of questions to pose to you, but I think you guys answered them all really. So I think I'll just ask if anyone has any questions for the panel.
So I have a few comments. Mary, thank you so much for sharing the story and the history of the community. And yes, on one hand, the community is dying, but I think the resiliency and the community spirit, and it really touched me when we talked about the pen pals. It just brought me back to it brought me back in time of the way how creative the community members were or are in sort of coming together, banding together and supporting each other in these various ways. And what struck me is like, this is a story that we often don't hear about the rural aspect of it. And I really do think that we need to be some avenue, and Sharon, I am looking to you as well, whereby really and truly that the stories or the way that the small community have rallied and come together during the most difficult time, I think we need to have a way where we can share that story, because for me, it is, it talks not only about the resiliency, but it talks about community spirit when we come together from a place of where we know that the external force support isn't there. Therefore, we have to create and make our own space. And for me, it is rich. It is touching. And I just want to say thank you, Mary, for the work that you have been doing and continue to do in giving the community hope, because I see that is a piece. It's not only hope, but also there's a purpose. And so my question is, you know, from your perspective, Mary, how do you think we can bring some of the younger people together so they can at least carry on some of that legacy in whatever way possible? Because the richness, the experiences, the triumph, I'll say triumph for lack of a better way, of being able to stay focused. I think this is something that we really need for the younger generation to really have some understanding of the depth, and they may not be able to grasp it now, but later on. So I'm thinking, is there a role for the young people to, as we pass the baton on to them, what do we need? What is needed to enable them to be engaged and to enable them to be able to feel anchored, so that they can at least keep the story going, for lack of a better word? I don't know if that makes sense, Mary. You're mute. Mary, you're on mute.
In August, we had the Emancipation Celebration, and the seniors was one that spearheaded it. We had the youth do the drumming for us. Like they did the drumming in the opening ceremony. And we have a food pantry down the foot of the lane. And we have two little community gardens in back of the food pantry, and they help look after that. They help look after the garden, and they help look after, they stock the food pantry. So like I said, anytime we can get them to do work with us and help do little projects with us, we always try to incorporate the youth do that. And even when we were doing the emancipation celebration event, we had two youth from two Black African Nova Scotia youth from NSCC. They came and we were mentorshipping them all summer. They came and they, from the conception right to the very end, and they were with us to show them how you do an event from conception to the end, and they did the part of the opening speech and everything else, and arranging, and how you get guest speakers, and so we showed them how to do an event and this and that. And like the young one said during her speech, she said, I didn't even know how to spell emancipation, but I know everything. I know how to spell it, and I know how to arrange things and how to get guest speakers. And she said, I really had a great experience, so now she could take on how to do an event, and I really quite proud, okay, I know now that, if we wanted someone to do an event, that she could go actually and, do an event. So we're like, when we're taking these young people under our wings to show them how to do something, we're quite proud of, we can get drummers and stuff like that. So we're doing stuff like that, Josephine, trying to show these young people, you're not just sitting out there not learning stuff, but we're trying to teach them little things that, okay, this is what you can learn, from us old people, so that if we're gone, you can do this here, without. So it was really a nice summer that we taught different things to the young people. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do now, is mentorshipping them to learn how to do different things in the community that, hopefully that they can carry on the tradition.
Thank you, Mary. But somehow Shirley and Sharon, somehow I think Mary's story of that community need to be shared widely, because often when you think of a community with no external support for some of the basic pieces, and yet they can come together, drawing on their strength and their own belief and their camaraderie, and yet at the same time being able to be sustained and survive through this. I think we need to there need to be an opportunity to share this story, and not from the fact that I think from two perspectives, from the perspective to say that despite it all, yet we have been able to be creative. And secondly is, given the fact that we have come this way, there need to be an outcry to be able to figure out how we find support for those communities, right? Because it's a two-way street. If they can do that without nothing, can you imagine what would happen for this community to strive and thrive with a little bit of something? So I think for that reason, I think it's important. And I also important to think that is for the other young people and for other communities, that to really know that really and truly that one is able to achieve things despite the challenges. Right. The only thing that's what I thought was interesting to see the shift between the church no longer being that seen as the place for that support and really shifting it to the community. So I think in one way it's sad, but another way I think it really tells us when we come together, when we try to figure out how we survive, I think it's called survival, how, the things that were important to us prior, how if we're not careful, how we become obsolete.
Well, yes, and I would like to say a few things. First of all, absolutely, there is work going on around capturing these stories. COVID and the impact of COVID is being researched, information is being gathered. Today's recording can add to that. The work of the COVID team is not for only urban areas, it was for the whole of the province. And a report is being done about that. There were provisions, there was food outreach, there was activity outreach, there were opportunities for people to have products, even cleaning products at a time when you couldn't get them. That sort of thing was available, but that is not getting to the point of capturing stories. What I'm saying is that the report of that, of the work that we have done across the province and many other research opportunities, including what has happened here today, are rich stories that could be and should be captured and used to inform policy. You know that I'm a policy wonk. Everything for me is about how do we get proper, appropriate response, policy response, investments in communities, the work of Hawk in terms and the work of plans promoting leadership in African Nova Scotian health is about getting people, attracting young people into the health professions. Rural communities are key for this because of what Mary so aptly described, and that is that people will trust their own communities, the people that they know, that they grew up with as health professionals. Mary is the power of an example that is second to none in my estimation, but she should not be, and would agree that she cannot be the only one. And so there needs to be the recruitment of young people from across this province into the health professions. They need to be supported to succeed. There needs to be space made. There needs to be mentoring available. These are all things we talk about. These are all things that we advocate for within the health system. The funding that is available in primary health care to build communities, we need to focus it. It needs to be culturally specific. What about Black in this province? And it is needed more than ever in rural areas. And so we are doing that work. We call on government all the time to invest in this. And I often remind people that marginalized people, racialized people are taxpayers. This system is not to exclude us. This system works because we contribute to it. So we need to be responded to with funding, with programming, and we need to be at those tables. And there is something interesting. I'll just leave with this. There's something interesting when you hear people say, well, we want Black people and we want Indigenous people and we want LGBTQ and two-spirited people at the table. And the assumption is, and this was said, I don't think I'm giving too many tales out of school, but this was said at the Black family meeting. That is the assumption that the table belongs to you. The table belongs to all of us. We are constructors of the table too. So what we're looking for is action, investment, policy participation, engagement, and we're not going to be quiet until we get it, frankly. So Mary's got a whole community of people pushing for equity and justice and it is absolutely essential that our allies speak that language as well. We all need to be pushing for this justice. And I want to just say one other thing really quickly, Shelley, if I might. This shift, aging, Nova Scotia's action plan for an aging population, was to go from 217 to 221. I was a contributor. Many people were contributors. I bet Mary was a contributor to that. We made policy recommendations about funding people like the elders in Mary's community, because they are doing the work that government is not able to do or not doing, right? But they need to be funded, respected, and enabled to do the work that they do, and to pass on their skills and their abilities to others. So I will leave it at that.
Okay. Well, there's a way to go. There's a direction, I would say, that we need to look at, pay attention to, right, Jocelyn? Okay.
I think Dorothy
has her hand up, Shelley.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I love the idea of stories, but for Mary's story, what I would do is separate it. So you have one story that needs to go for policy change, and you have the other story that really can inspire other communities and children and youth, because really they should be extraordinarily proud of what they were able to do. But we don't want the government to think, well, if they're so good at this, they don't need our help. So I really think the two stories in some way need to be separated so they both have the impact they deserve.
Okay, I see another hand. Ed? Thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah. So this is both a serious and a humorous comment. I find that as I've aged, I've become my parents. And I look around and say, oh my God, am I saying what my dad or my mom said to me? There's a cycle and a chain that needs to be broken, and that's been identified in this morning's conversation. If we as family members help our older family prepare, no one, me included, wants to face the fact that the end is coming. We're scared of becoming that future self. If we find a way to empower younger people to be participants and tactfully change those conversations, we're in fact preparing ourselves, because we will become our parents and our children will become us. And I think by finding a way to get those conversations going, my favorite conversation was helping my mom when she had to go into a long-term care home, and she had her lawyer present, preparing her will and all that stuff, and her final preparation, she said, burn me, very spitefully. And she said, and so the question became, what kind of burn would you like, Mom? And she said, I want the cheapest one, because she was very careful about controlling her funds. And I said, look around the house, Mom, everything you've got here is dark, it's cherry, it's mahogany, whatever. She had an eye for antiques. I said to her, how are we going to know you're in that box if it's pine? And she was able to comprehend that. So learning the moments in time, just like raising kids, and I got 8 of them. It's just like you can't get through to them when they're unready to hear. They will give you the vehicle and the moment in time that you can act, but being aware enough, you're helping them and helping yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Ed. All right, any other questions? People want to comments people want to make about
I think
this?
Raina has her hand up there, Shell.
Oh, okay. Raina.
Hi,
Oh.
thanks, Shell. Thanks, Sharon and Mary, for all of those wisdom and stories that you shared. And Sharon, in particular, I want to thank you for all of the work that you did in DHW and how hard and what a trailblazer internally within government on those policy pieces and now externally as well. It's the data piece is something that I have worked on my whole career, and it's, you know, it's one example of how white supremacy really invisibilizes what's needed, what the problems are, even when the community knowledge and the antidote is all there. It's the problem is known, and yet we don't have the numbers to back that up, and often that's what speaks to policymakers and government. So thank you for all your work on that. I have a question about just generally and what you're noticing in community around anxiety as we maybe hopefully start to emerge from COVID, and what is and how is community responding. I'm noticing in my life personally, there are sort of the jubilant sort of reemergence. I'm vaccinated and I want to get out. And then there are a lot of folks in my life who are still very, very cautious and like almost incapacitated, and particularly older people in my life who are not going back out into society, even though we've sort of done all the things that we can do because of their increased risk. And I'm just wondering how that's playing out in rural, urban, African Nova Scotian communities across Nova Scotia from what you've seen.
Well, I'll jump in, and I sure hope that Mary will talk about her experience, because it may be quite different. But with the town halls that the Health Association of African Canadians have held, as I say, we've had several right from the beginning of the pandemic. There is always a portion of those in which we talk about the impact of COVID on mental health. And right from the beginning, we often would have, we always have Black health professionals, because it is important that people see themselves, and our work needs to be rooted in cultural specificity. We're clear about that. And so the clinicians you know, we had Dr. Jacob Cookie, who is one of the only Black psychiatrists in the province, and as well as other people would talk about maintaining self-care, the importance of spirituality to our people. You know, faith perspectives range. It can be, some people see it clearly as religion, others talk about spiritual well-being. We make room for all of that, and grief support was also very important and part of what we did and what we do. We make that available to people. The point is that anxiety has been an issue right from the beginning and continues to be an issue. And I do understand that after being in confined space, being afraid to go outside, that, you know, opening doesn't change that anxiety, it probably increases it. And so I hate to, you know, be to go back to me, the basics, but what we do need to understand in terms of responding to the heightened anxiety or the uncovered anxiety that might have always been there, but with COVID has come to a head. And so we can do it. What we need to do is to invest in culturally specific, culturally competent mental health practice. And we need to build more practitioners. We don't just say they all have to be psychiatrists. They can be coaches. They can be pastors. They can be the elders that Mary describes. But we need to support them, give them the opportunity to build their skills, so that they can provide culturally specific assistance. Because yes, there is anxiety. Yes, it has increased, and we need to respond to it in ways that are effective. There's no point in just saying you can call this number and the number might get you someone who has no idea about your history, your lived reality as a people, how you express yourselves, the kinds of ways in which mental illness presents. We need culturally competent care, regardless of who is giving it, regardless of the color of the provider. But we also need culturally specific approaches by all of the mental health providers. So over to you, Mary.
Yeah, I agree with Sharon, like especially in the rural area, we're very cautious and the anxiety is high. Are we going to, even if, you know, the government says, you know, okay, open the gates, we're still going to be very, very cautious. We're not going to, you know, take off the masks and start, you know, partying. No, that's not going to happen. You know, especially with our seniors are very cautious. I think that's why down here in the eastern zone down here in Guysborough, we had very little. I don't think we had any cases down here. Very cautious, and we're going to stay that way. I don't think, you know, everyone down here still wears their masks. They, you know, they're hand washing, they're, you know, they're 100%, you know, compliance. And I just don't see it, you know, their anxiety is very, very high, and I don't see any change. And like Sharon says, like, you know, we're going to have to need someone come in to explain, you know, when the time comes that, you know, cultural competency, you know, and it won't matter, you know, what color, but it's going to, and it's going to have to go and coincide with someone in the community, an elder or someone, you know, that they trust, that, you know, because I don't think, you know, bringing someone in that's, you know, can have all the PhDs in the world, but they're going to have to see that person that they can trust, that say, okay, it's all right to take that mask off. It's all right, you know, you can relax, you know, because they'll come and say, Mary, do you think it's okay? And I'll say, yeah, you can take that mask off now, you know, it's okay. They're going to need that person. So yeah, I think that's the way it's going to have to go.
Thank you, Mary. I understand exactly what you're saying, and yeah, there's a whole bowl of anxiety soup out there. You know.
Yeah. But I will say, Shelley, if I could, more of what you're doing here, more opportunity for people to have the chance to express themselves and to hear people who look like them saying, it's okay, we've got you, we can help you, there are places you can go, we are always open. That is very, very helpful. And that has changed the landscape, because this type of interaction, these opportunities were not here, you know, before COVID. So kudos to you and your work. To Mary, absolutely, you know, you're a one-woman wonder. But we want to help. We want more, and you should, and both of you deserve to be supported in the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. I tell you, it was a godsend, the clinics that came out to the New Beginnings and to the East Preston Rec Center, because I don't know how many people would have trapped in, you know, into chapters by Micmac. I mean, we had Black people coming from Halifax.
Yes.
There was a whole Halifax crew. I said, what are you guys doing here? Because, you know, this.
Yeah, Shelley, I have to say this. We fought for culturally specific African Nova Scotian health clinics. You know, that wasn't just what people decided to do. We had to put forward the ask. We had to justify why that was important. And then we helped create safe spaces that people trusted by providers that look like them. And as a result of this work, close to 70% of our people are vaccinated.
Oh, thank you so much for all that work. That meant a whole bunch to the community, I gotta tell you. Anyway, I guess we're gonna take some time now to say thank you